everyone, it's your podcast host, Zenith. This is just another small episode in between my very busy schedule of recording interviews, which I'm currently doing. So, I wanted to talk about the current situation in Ukraine, the terrible situation that's unfolding here in Ukraine at the minute, and how I see it from my perspective. There's a lot being said about the situation in the media, in international media, and the vast majority of it is widely condemnating. I think that's the word. President Putin and Russia for their aggressive actions, and while absolutely, I think we should condemn Putin and Russia's actions for their aggression and for their apparent illegal invasion. I think we need to take a step back here and just realise perhaps a few things. I guess the first thing to say about this here is that ultimately it doesn't really matter who's to blame for this here, because there's a lot of back and forth in, as I said, the media, certain sections of the media regarding this here. The real losers here are the Ukrainian and potentially Russian people, and also by and large people of Europe and the international community. It's the ordinary everyday people who suffer from these wars. There are no winners in wars, there are only losers. It's not going to be President Biden that will be losing out. It will not be President Biden that pays higher energy prices or pays more for their food. It will not be President Putin or his close allies that pay more for energy prices or pay more for food and will not ultimately get hit by these sanctions. It's going to be the ordinary people. It's going to be the ordinary people of Ukraine who have been put through so much. And it's going to be, as I said, the people of Europe and the international community at large who suffer the most from these wars. They always do. I guess from my perspective is, while the international community and while the press have been largely condemned, I can't get that word. I might sound a bit off here, but that's it's my first kind of interview. It's my first recording after contracting COVID for the past week, and I didn't think it would affect me that much, but it has, and this is despite taking a battery of supplements from it, so you'll have to excuse my voice. But back to the topic at hand here. For me, it's very hard to trust the mainstream media in this day and age. I think I also recorded like a 3 or 4 part podcast on COVID and its origins and how I feel that it has been manipulated to widespread fear and widespread mongering in order to push people's agendas. And I also talked about how the information around it has been very widely manipulated by tech giants, social media, and the mainstream media, mainstream news and mainstream papers. And I think that what we're seeing in this Ukraine-Russian crisis is an extension of that too. I think what we're living in currently could be termed a war on information. It is the age of war on information. We've seen so much restrictions and so much demonetization and shutting down of channels of anyone who doesn't agree with the current narrative regarding COVID, or anyone who dissents and has something to say about vaccinations, about alternative treatments, about the people potentially responsible behind it, and are outspoken critics of the restrictions that we are seeing in place about it. I guess the good thing about this now is that we're seeing a lot more people speaking out about it, but certainly there has been not just ordinary people or ordinary news media or alternative media, but we've also seen plenty of influential figures, doctors, nurses, researchers, all people who are widely hailed as experts or have been widely hailed as experts, 20, 30 years of experience in regards to vaccinations, in regards to immunology, in regards to the effects of psychology and what lockdowns have done. Have had their opinions scrubbed and scrapped and have not allowed to be heard. And I think that what we're seeing here is a similar sort of scenario, because of the apparent illegal actions of Russia. We have seen a number of sanctions placed against Russia, and some of these have obviously included the stopping or shutting down of broadcasting of Russian channels or Russian affiliated channels in certain countries. And these have been taken on the basis that, especially like channels like RT and Sputnik, that they are propaganda tools for the Kremlin. And while I think that this probably is right, there is quite a lot of propaganda and a lot of sort of biased viewpoints for the Russian government portrayed in those news channels. I would ask, is these news channels any more of a propaganda tool than the likes of CNN or Fox News for Republican or Democrat parties? Any more of a propaganda, perhaps the BBC for the English government, or pick any of your state-run media or any of your closely affiliated media that are lockstep in with your own governments there. I think the very danger point of this here, and we've also seen removal of some of their content from social media platforms such as Facebook and YouTube, is that when you take away one half of or when you take away a dissenting opinion, or when you take away a voice that gives a narrative or gives an opinion that doesn't align with yours or doesn't align with your point of view, is that you're left just with one point of view or one half of the story. I think that's very dangerous. I think that regardless of whether you think that channels such as these are propaganda tools for the Russian government, they do also show and portray a different side of life and a different narrative and a different story than what we perhaps may be getting in our own local or international government approved news channels or media. And I think that's a very dangerous situation, because then this can be left open to abuse. It can be left open to abuse as in, well, basically they can then potentially run any news story you want, and you'll not have access to a dissenting opinion or an opinion that disagrees with that, because said channels have been removed. So then how do you then determine the truth or the veracity of a story then? Especially if you're someone that isn't quite fluent or isn't quite tech savvy and potentially relies on normal mainstream media or social media giants for their news. How do you determine whether a story is true or not? Where would you go in order to find that? I think a lot of media today is very emotive based. It portrays a certain angle, it portrays a certain viewpoint in order to stir up emotions or to potentially portray a narrative. I think quite a lot of the media that we're seeing now in this here Ukraine-Russian crisis is quite like that. There seems to be numerous disagreements or numerous viewpoints that I've seen from myself, taking on a very large kind of body of very different media. So I've obviously listened to the mainstream media in the UK and some of the US, but I've also listened and read a lot of Russian affiliated, a lot of pro sort of Russian media like RT, in order to broaden my experience, in order to do this thing called critical thinking, in which you take one viewpoint, you listen to what that viewpoint has to say, then you take the other viewpoint, the other side of the story, and you listen to what they have had to turn around and say about the situation, and then you determine what you think is right. So I've taken as many different points of view, and I've also obviously taken points of view that potentially don't particularly have a what would you want to call it, I can't remember, is it a dog in this race, a horse in this race, a vested interest in this here, that you would like to think that are partially neutral in this here. So what I've done is I've taken all these different viewpoints from all these different media and tried to figure out what is actually going on here. I guess the first thing to say is that, does Russia have any sort of legitimate claim to their claims, to their so-called grievances? And I think they do. I think honestly they do. Without getting into the history of the USSR and the Eastern Bloc and Ukraine and stuff like that, I think that Russia's main gripe was that we've had the encroachment of NATO, the Western affiliated NATO powers or NATO countries, slowly and steadily encroaching ever further and ever closer to Russia's borders, so that they're almost on Russia's porch, which Putin has claimed. I think the red line for Putin, as he said, was not to arm Ukraine, was not to involve NATO or grant Ukraine NATO membership. And I think this is important because I think that after the breakup of the USSR, when a lot of what we now call Eastern Europe, these countries which was part of the USSR, were granted full independence to be independent countries on their own. There were certain guarantees, there were certain promises made that Russia would have its borders protected, that there would be no eastward advancement towards Russian borders from NATO. And I think that we've seen obviously the eventual inclusion since the breakup of the USSR of many eastern countries. And so Russia feels very threatened by this. Russia feels very threatened that NATO missiles, NATO capabilities could strike Russia within 10 minutes. I think the very important point there was that Russia, Vladimir Putin, made the point of, well, how would the United States like it if Russia, I'm talking about, put their missiles into Alaska, if Alaska invited Russia or asked to become part of the Russian Federation? So it's a very important point to make there. Now, does that justify Russia what appears to be illegally attacking Ukraine? I don't think so. The way that they have done this was through the two separatist republics, or the two separate parts of Ukraine, which broke away from all of Ukraine back in 2015. They were never formally recognized as independent states. So still remain part of Ukraine, but have never been fully re-implemented back into Ukraine. And so there's been a lot of fighting, a lot of sectarian fighting, a lot of lives lost since those times, because of the military build-up in Ukraine, the advancement of Western interests. Because of this here, because of the militarization of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin granted these two republics full independent status. So he eventually recognized them as separate countries from Ukraine. So by doing that there, it allowed these two countries to, as independent countries, to request help from Russia. And so that gave Putin and the Russian state the legality to go in and help these two countries. So that's their what's the word here? That was their signal, or that was their apparently legal way of invading Ukraine, if you want to call it Ukraine. Now, obviously, they've expanded beyond those two separate states, the two states that make up the Donbass, and have started attacking the rest of Ukraine, Kiev in particular, under the basis that they are trying to remove neo-Nazis. Putin has called the Ukrainian Prime Minister and numerous others neo-Nazis that need to be getting rid of. Now, obviously, as I said, in Western media, there has been some talk of this. Some outlets have published more of these reasons than others, but most have stated that it is completely illegal. But there doesn't seem to be too much talk about, as I said, Russian interests, about the failure to not militarize Ukraine. The Minsk agreements, which were conducted by the Russia, US, UK and France, I think, which back in 2015 and up until the present day, were agreements that these two republics and the main Ukraine country would sign these agreements and agree to ceasefires and begin talks to come to some sort of terms as to how they would proceed with these two regions that make up the Donbass. How they would either become completely separate states or reintegrate into Ukraine or have some sort of autonomy. These were never signed, so this is what Putin keeps on referring to, that they were never signed, and so they felt that it was prudent of them to launch this invasion. And we've seen many viewpoints on the television. We've seen many, as I said, emotive stories on the mainstream media and in our papers regarding this here. But as I said, we've seen so many different viewpoints as well. If you care to, if you happen to have access, you know where to look. Of different state parts or different medias and different narratives that give the Russian perspective on this here. As I say, we live in an information age, and it's extremely hard in today's present society to determine what exactly is real and what exactly is a narrative and what exactly is false. And I don't think we can ever really know. I don't think it's as simple as black and white in this here. I think that there are multiple different viewpoints or multiple different interests in this here. You have obviously Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation's concerns about the build-up and militarization of Ukraine. We have what appears to be in Western society and the US that this was a legal invasion upon Ukraine's territory. We have the perspective of parts of eastern Ukraine which are largely Russian speaking and largely loyal to Russia and to want to remain close ties with Russia. Then we have Western Ukraine, which seems to be mostly in favour of closer ties with Europe and autonomy. Maybe autonomy is not the right word, but membership of NATO, to be formally recognised as part of the EU. So there are a lot of different viewpoints in this here. Then we also don't know Putin's thinking as well. Does he really want to restore the old Soviet Republic? Is he really planning to take over the entire Ukraine, and potentially, if he gets away with this here, is there at some point down the line that he may look at invading other eastern states that were formerly part or were previously part of the Russian Federation? We just don't know. We just don't know. The other part of this here is that we've seen so many sanctions and so many blocks upon Russian goods and Russian energy and Russian exports. Because of all this here, we've now seen steps to remove Russian athletes from the soccer or football World Cup and from other various sporting endeavours. I think this is completely wrong, because you're not punishing Vladimir Putin, you're not punishing his inner circle, excuse me, his associates. What you're punishing is those people and those players and those athletes who have worked themselves into a position where they are now, who are quite probably not particularly very loyal to the Russian thing. We just don't know. But I think it's very unfair to punish ordinary people for the actions of Vladimir Putin and his inner circle, I guess. In the same way that all of these sanctions and all of these bans on goods and exports will ultimately hit the ordinary, everyday people in the pocket. I also think that it's a very ironic, is what we need to remember here in this in the media, which doesn't get talked about. And I don't want to sound as if I'm just doing this what you call whataboutery, is when a point is raised, you immediately contest it with, well, what about, which doesn't actually address the original grievance, the original point. But we also have to remember here is that for all the condemnation, for all the moral high ground taken by especially the UK and the US, is that the UK and especially the US have invaded quite a lot of countries over the past years. We've seen the illegal invasion of Iraq. We've seen the illegal invasion of Afghanistan. We've seen the illegal invasion of Syria. These countries where they were never asked or invited to come in. We've seen the invasion of Syria. We've seen invasions of Somalia and threatening talks of invading Iran and numerous other countries. And with this here, we've seen the displacement of millions of people, of the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives. And we've seen mass exodus of people from their homelands into countries such as Europe. And the countless loss of life of US personnel and UK personnel and EU personnel. A lot of these invasions have been done without UN resolutions, but yet we haven't seen any talk or any threatening of actions similar to the ones that we've seen here on Russia. And again, this is not to pick sides. It's just simply to provide balance and point out point out kind of the hypocrisy that we're seeing in the media, where we didn't see, I guess, the same sort of outrage and aggression and threatening of sanctions against illegal invasions, and to date, a lot more loss of life and a lot more destruction in these countries that I mentioned by superpowers such as the US. Perhaps that's because these countries feel that the US is too powerful to punish. Perhaps they are afraid. Perhaps it's because it's not what we would term part of Russia, part of Europe. That they've been Arab countries. Perhaps there's less care. Perhaps there's less feeling for people in these countries as there is for a country like Ukraine, because it does seem to be mostly European countries which have imposed these sanctions and have been outraged by these, rather than many countries around the world. There doesn't seem to be too much condemnation for countries in the Middle East, from South America. I've yet to hear Australia's or New Zealand's viewpoints on this here, and also countries like China and countries surrounding that country. So I'm perhaps wondering, maybe I'm completely wrong, but I'm wondering, does this, or is this part of the reason why? That perhaps there's less care, there's less thought for human life in countries in the Middle East? Is it because they are Muslim countries and Europe is a predominantly Christian country, or a historical Christian country? I don't know. What I do know, as I said, is that there does seem to be a lot of hypocrisy in the media regarding this here. And while we should condemn Vladimir Putin and the Russian army and the Russian state for doing this here, for invading Ukraine, we need to take a step back and realize that we aren't in full possession of the facts. Even for someone who, as I said, does a lot of research, does a lot of different viewpoints, tries to get as much viewpoint and as much fact-based news as possible, and try to get as many different viewpoints portraying each of this. I honestly do not know where I am in this. It's okay, there's a lot of people that will just simply accept what their own media is saying to them. There's a lot of people who are aligned with the Russian viewpoint and will believe everything that comes out of that. But ultimately, we actually don't know. We don't know the full ins and outs of this. We're only reading news stories that are giving a certain angle, a certain narrative. And so, from myself, I found myself becoming very emotionally involved in this situation. I found myself a lot of emotions coming up, a lot of anger, a lot of contentment about people who are just simply buying into narratives in which their own country was saying. And that's not helpful either. It's completely not helpful. So what I needed to do was take myself out of that. And I guess the advice that came to me was be like a Buddha. Be like a Buddha and find the middle path. Find the middle ground in this here. There is no black and white in this. We can only have the middle ground in this here. Try to find balance in this. And remember that we're getting sucked into the games of politics. We're getting sucked into the games of geopolitics. That ultimately these wars, these acts of aggression, they're over borders, they're over land, they're over resources. And as spiritual people, or people who are trying to lead a spiritual life, we have to realize that we're not defined by the colour of our skin. We're not defined by our nationality. We are not defined by our ethnic background. That we are living a temporary experience inside a human body. We are spirit ultimately. And the people who are suffering the most in this, as I said before at the beginning of this here, are the people who are trapped in the middle of this. It's the Ukrainian people. And so it's with that there that we need to stop getting sucked into these games of politics and picking sides, because it's never solved anything. And these ones who are putting the shots, who are making the decisions, are not the ones who are going to suffer throughout this. It's going to be the ordinary, everyday people, people like you, people like me, who are suffering this here. So what we need to do is stop getting emotionally involved in these sides picking, stop siding with either side in this here, and simply expend your energy, if you need to, in sympathy for Ukrainian people and anyone else who's been pulled into this conflict. So what we need to do is become like a Buddhist. Let go of attachments. Let go of emotional attachments to right or wrong or good or bad here. We don't know the truth, and we probably won't know the ultimate truth in this here for many years to come, in the same way that we still don't know the truth about this coronavirus and where it's come from and its origins, and who let it out, if it's man-made or not, and vaccinations and the rightness and wrongness of restrictions. And so it's going to be the same in this here. Let go of attachments to either side. Focus your energy. Send love, send light to the Ukrainian people. And remember that you may think that this is useless. Well, that's not going to solve anything. Well, thoughts are very powerful. We do know that thoughts carry weight, and we do know the fact that mass praying, that mass meditation can make changes in the physical world. We constantly talk about the power of attraction, the law of attraction, manifesting things into our lives, manifesting things. But generally it's only for our own ends. It's only for how can I manifest my life better. I truly believe, how many people out there practice law of attraction and truly believe it works. So if you're going to practice law of attraction and do truly believe it works, how about practicing law of attraction and trying to attract or trying to manifest peace, cool heads in this situation? How about we all do that, and we can help hopefully stop this escalation. We've heard talk in the media from Vladimir Putin that to be prepared for nuclear readiness. So the threat of nuclear arms is apparently being discussed. And when I don't think that it will come to this here, I think that's just a doomsday scenario in case Russia was invaded. And ultimately, I don't think that this would be allowed to happen. We know that nuclear bombs that have been set off in space have been stopped before, that they've been disarmed before by various bodies and entities that are around our planet right now. I don't think that it would be allowed to come to that. I don't think that, but this, once again, this talk creates fear, it creates anger. And so what we need to do is use our practices like meditation, like sending prayers, like your law of attraction, to try and manifest change in the world, to try and manifest peace, and to hope that these peace talks, these mediation that apparently are underway today, will be successful and some sort of agreement will be in place. And so I think that is the most important message. Take a step back from right or wrong. Realize that what is being portrayed in the media is probably not the 100% facts, and that restrictions on media, on Russian media, are probably not helpful, because it only leaves us then with one side of the story, one view, which can be very easily manipulated, very easily distorted and abused. And just as I said, send your prayers, send your thoughts, send your good wishes, meditate if you like, and hope that this situation resolves in a peaceful way. So with that, I've been your host, Zenith, and I hope that the next time I speak to you, we will have better news.